What is happening, baby? It's your boy Indo is my Nindo, and I'm back at you again today with another fantasy football huddle presented by the Huddle Chat Sports. And I gotta be honest with you guys. I'm excited. I'm stoked. It's National Draft Weekend. I don't know what everybody else has going on. I know my personal big drafts are this coming Sunday, and I can't wait. I've been getting all my studying together, all my research together, and at this point, I just need to put the research in motion and just start letting the players fall on my team. Today on the Fantasy Football Huddle, we're going to be focusing on a couple of different rules, a couple of different techniques you need to do on how to properly prepare for your coming fantasy football draft, so that way you can dominate your fantasy football league this season and win that moolah, baby. But before we get started, as always, we got to get it sparked up. We got to get it turned off right. So as always, now's the time that if you got them, you smoke them. Smoke them if you got them, baby. Let's get it cracking right now. Now, if you haven't seen it yet, I recently released a video that's going to be 6 rules to follow to dominate your draft. It really has nothing to do with strategy whatsoever. It's just 6 rules to keep in mind while you're drafting, no matter how stoned, no matter how drunk, no matter how just busy you get. You may be having 2 drafts going on at the same time. These 6 rules will help you follow and find success no matter what happens in your fantasy football draft this week. But today, like I said, we're focusing on how to prepare and go into your fantasy football draft this weekend and find major success and find yourself in the money this playoffs. As we talked about in that 6 rules to follow, this is not your final roster. So be cautious on putting too much into that draft. That draft is a big portion of the fantasy football season. It's one of the most fun portions of the fantasy football season. It's the most exciting at some points because it's getting right into it. But keep in mind that this is not your final fantasy football roster. You can make a mistake, and that's okay. A player can get injured tomorrow, and that's okay. It's all about how you recover from that. But right now we're going to be preparing for our fantasy draft. Now, first things first, going into your fantasy football draft, any fantasy football expert, veteran will tell you the same thing here. You need a 5-round plan of attack. Whether you're going into a 10-man league or a 12-man league, a 5-round plan of attack is extremely important. That first 5 rounds is kind of the fantasy football equivalent of your first drive, your opening drive of a football game. Typically, those that can script that first that first portion of the draft together the best find the most success and the easiest route to the fantasy football playoffs. The first 5 picks are going to and should make up at least half of your weekly starters. You want to get a lot of those set it and forget it style players. You want to get a lot of those players that you can go into with confidence. You don't want to put too much focus in on that first pick, because you can go in there with the first pick, take Christian McCaffrey, and completely bomb the draft after that. There's 4 more core pieces in your draft. That first 5 rounds is extremely important. It's important to get in that first 5 rounds. You're probably going to want to hit that running back room twice. You're probably going to hit that wide receiver room at least once or twice, and depending on your strategy, you might end up getting one of those Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen quarterbacks in that first 5 rounds. That first 5 rounds is going to build the kind of archetype that your team is going to follow this season. So you kind of want to minimize a lot of that risk there in that first 5 picks, and going off of that, we want to go early and often with running backs, as we discussed in that 6 rules to follow episode. And if you haven't seen it, I'll drop links down in the description, of course. But one of the main rules that we spoke about was the running backs. And when it comes to running back is the most valuable position on the fantasy football board, not because it's the highest scoring. That's the quarterback position is the highest scoring position on the fantasy football board. Running back, however, due to the amount of attrition that running backs need in order to be a successful fantasy football running back on a consistent basis, the amount of elite running backs is such a low number that it's really hard to find that set it and forget it type running back. Not very many of those exist, and even those top tier running backs have their own question. Derrick Henry has had over 600 carries in the last 2 years, and it's hard for somebody to take that many carries week after week after week and stay healthy. Now, of course, we hope he stays healthy. You look at Dalvin Cook hasn't been able to play a consistent 16 games. You're looking at Christian McCaffrey coming off injury, having a new quarterback. I mean, even the elite running backs have issues. Now, when you're looking at your running back, even the top tier running backs are different a little bit. Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey do a lot with receiving as well. I remember not last year because Christian McCaffrey was hurt, but in 2019, if you took away Christian McCaffrey's running back stats, he was something like the 13th best wide receiver in the league. He was a number one borderline wide receiver if he did not run the ball one time that season. So he does a lot with his feet as well as out of the backfield catching that ball as well. Same thing with Alvin Kamara. You're looking at Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook deliver a lot more with their pure yardage and scoring and just strength and ability. But they all are kind of in that same category. You're looking at those running backs, and you want one that's going to be taking 17 to 20 touches per game. Like I said, running backs need a lot of attrition in order to be a consistent, successful fantasy football running back. Now, with the combination of your running back 1, running back 2, you want one explosive and consistent running back that you can start from week to week, as well as a very good complementary back that will also be able to step in and potentially have a bigger role later on in the season. Most fantasy football leagues start a minimum of 2 running backs. I know my fantasy football leagues, the standard is 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex, which is a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end. And in most cases, starting that third running back sometimes it's hard not to do if you have that third running back that's up at that valuable level. And you want to diversify your running backs and your backups specifically. With your backups, you want a couple of those running backs that may have a really early role and be able to take off early. Looking at James Robinson after that Travis Etienne injury. You're looking at Najee Harris with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the current moment. You're looking at some of those not starting running backs, but those backups that are going to be having a bigger role earlier in the season. And then you're looking for some of those running backs like a Tony Pollard, who is one injury away from being a premier running back, being a top 10 running back in the league for those weeks while Ezekiel Elliott may miss. Knock on wood, of course. We don't want that to happen. But you want to diversify your backups, even if that consists of handcuffing a running back that you yourself have or a player that somebody else has on their roster, depending on the health situation at the top of other people's rosters and yours included. So we definitely want to go ahead and have those running backs. We want to hit early and often on running backs. You want to have a couple of lottery tickets that you can scratch when everything goes sour, and that's where we're going to have those running backs. You're looking at 5 to 7 running backs minimum at the end of your draft. I mean, it sounds like a lot, and it is, because running backs get hurt so often. A lot of teams are going running back by committee and go with that hot hand approach. So as the season progresses, as we've talked about before, this is a week by week game that we play over the course of a season. Your running back room is going to change. As we've said before, this is not your final roster. So you just make sure you prepare and you are ready for the worst case scenario. Now, with always having to hit that go early and often with running backs, you do want to come out of that first 5 rounds with at least one elite wide receiver. You're not going to find an elite wide receiver outside of the first 5 rounds. That's why I make sure to say you don't want to leave that first 5 rounds. Even though we're going early and often on running back, you do not, let me repeat it, you do not want to leave that first 5 rounds without at least one elite wide receiver. Now, an elite wide receiver does not have to be a Devontae Adams, does not have to be a DeAndre Hopkins. An elite wide receiver is just that number one wide receiver, that set it and forget it style wide receiver, similar to the running back 1 that you're going to have on your team. The top running backs have the most value, and passing has brought standout wide receivers to an absolute another level here in this game of fantasy football. I mean, looking at Devontae Adams, like we spoke about before, Devontae Adams outscored all running backs last season but one in fantasy football, being Alvin Kamara. Every other running back in the league did not score as many points as Devontae Adams. Like we said before, running back is not the highest scoring. It's just the most valuable due to lack of depth at the said position. I mean, the plain and simple fact is, like I said, with the way that the passing game has changed the NFL landscape, a stud wide receiver has served to be more of a sure thing, a surefire situation than most running backs that you can start in your fantasy football league. You look at the drop off from wide receiver 5 to wide receiver 15, it's minuscule compared to the amount of points that you lose between running back 5 and running back 15. It's almost twice the amount. We'll pop that up a little bit more when we get more in depth on the running back and wide receiver positions in the running back and wide receiver specific episodes. Now, with me saying that you want to take that wide receiver before the end of the 5th, realistically, to get an elite wide receiver, you're going to want to hit that wide receiver room before mid 3rd round. Before the end of the 3rd round, you should have at least one wide receiver on your team, if not 2. I mean, depending on the picks and the flow of your draft, it's perfectly okay to open up wide receiver, or open up wide receiver, tight end, depending on the flow of the draft. Nobody's going to bat an eye at you for opening up Devontae Adams to DeAndre Hopkins with the 8th pick in your draft if everybody else is, if 7 running backs went off the board before that. You're even okay to open up wide receiver, tight end, and get that Travis Kelce. It's all about value. That's another rule that we talked about in that 6 rules episode, is draft based upon value. If at any point you find yourself in your fantasy football draft feeling like you're needing to force a pick, or everybody has drafted running back and now you're left looking at Joe Mixon versus DeAndre Hopkins, that's an obvious situation. You don't want to you don't want to force picks. You don't want to force something to follow into your draft strategy, or this is the plan that I had going into this, so I don't want to come out. I mean, if the wind takes you that way, let the wind take you. Take the better player versus forcing the pick. I mean, there's going to be less attrition among wide receivers, so they tend to be more durable, take less injuries. You still want to stock up on wide receivers, have at least 4 wide receivers, depending on your rules, of course, in your league. But you should honestly want to hit wide receiver at least. You should want to hit wide receiver twice before the end of that 5th round in most drafts. Like I said, don't be a slave to those picks. Don't try to fall into that category and try to force anything. If the wind takes you that way and you end up getting 3 stud running backs in that first 5 rounds, nobody's going to be mad at you. But you should want, your idea should be to hit that wide receiver room twice before the end of the 5th round. Now, moving on from wide receiver, it's important for you guys to understand with the tight end position, it's no longer too early or too late to draft a tight end in your fantasy football draft coming up here. I mean, over the past few seasons, it's come kind of, you either go early and get one of those top 3 stud tight ends, or you wait to fill that position in a little bit later and fill in other more valuable positions as you go on throughout the draft. But tight end is back to being a very deep position. Quarterback has always been a deep position. Wide receiver has always been a deep position, but tight end is just now getting into a bigger and better role and finally becoming deep. You have Kelce, Kittle, Darren Walker. Those are those top tier tight ends. Those are those tight ends that you're going to have to spend a premium pick in order to get. You're going to have to spend one of those top 5 picks in order to get a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle, for sure, to be honest with you. Now, right behind that top tier, though, we're looking at T.J. Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, and those are all coming in rounds 4, 5, 6. Those are those kind of second tier good tight ends that you would be happy to get, but you can still wait on those, because even after Kyle Pitts and those 4, we still have a lot of upside at the tight end room. You have Robert Tonyan from Green Bay, caught 11 touchdowns last season. You're looking at Dallas Goedert from the Philadelphia Eagles. Zach Ertz looks like he's definitely on the way out the door. You're looking at Noah Fant from Denver. That kid is athletic, and that offense is just getting better and better, as much as I like to talk crap about it. I mean, it's smart to grab a top 12 player at the right time. What I mean by the right time, that means when his value is better than that of a player at a different position. Now, if you're looking at a running back and you're saying that I think that this tight end, I think Darren Waller can get me more points from week to week than J.K. Dobbins, well, then that's an obvious choice. You go Darren Waller. You go with the most valuable pick at the time. That's how you're going to go with this tight end choice. Like I said, it's a very deep spot. And then you even have the sleeper pool of tight ends. Behind the 9 or 10 tight ends I've already given you, We even have the sleeper pool of tight ends. You have Irv Smith Jr. or Cole Kmet from Chicago. Both have a lot of potential, a lot of upside, and you even have the potential with how deep tight end is to stash that player or wait on that player on your watch list and take advantage of that later on when they start to come in that role if you have a better replacement earlier on in the season. Tight end is a position where you really honestly you're back to the point where tight end can win and lose you your league if you make the wrong choice at the wrong time. Now, with that being said, moving on from tight end, we're going to quarterback. Like I said, tight end is back to being a deep position, but quarterback has always been there. I've always been a person that's told you that it's extremely important to wait on your quarterbacks, and that's depending upon your draft strategy, of course, but it's so much smarter to wait on your quarterbacks because of the price that you're going to have to pay to get a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or Kyler Murray, who enjoyed breakout years last season that put them up in that Patrick Mahomes category, even above Lamar Jackson. You have the Russell Wilson still in that elite fantasy quarterback area as well. You will definitely have to pay a premium draft pick for them, and that just personally doesn't fall into my draft strategy. But of course, there are many different draft strategies, which of course we're going to be going over in future videos as well. But behind those top four quarterbacks, you have Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson as well, who are both dropping down, and you think that they're most likely going to be having some regression, but them both dropping 5 to 6 spots in the rankings may have them a little bit undervalued. Then you're looking at some of those Matthew Staffords and Joe Burrows who are surrounded by great talent and have a lot of upsides and have a high volume of passing in their team. And then you're looking at those Jalen Hurts and a couple of those in those 4 rookie starts that he had. He shined. He's got a couple questions. He's got a terrible surrounding cast. But Jalen Hurts has a lot of potential as well. Going deeper, you got even in the quarterback 2 area, you even still have the Daniel Jones, the Matt Ryans, the Tom Brady's, the quarterbacks that don't seem to move as much. Trevor Lawrence as well. You're looking at those possible rookie takeovers as well with Justin Fields and Trey Lance, both potentially going to be the starting quarterbacks of their respective teams by the end of the season. It'd be awesome to be able to stash one of those players having a better starter throughout the beginning of the year and having Justin Fields or Trey Lance do to you what Justin Herbert did at the end of the year last year and become that quarterback where you're like, man, this kid is going to be something. But at the end of the day, quarterback is just there's so much in quarterback. You can go wrong at quarterback, of course, but you don't have to be afraid that if you don't get Patrick Mahomes that you're not going to win your league, because you can easily win your league with a Joe Burrow. Now, a couple of the more basic rules that you should be able to follow. I mean, a couple of more basic ideas, but everybody seems to forget these sometimes. First off, you got to know why you're taking a player. Now, that sounds like some real simple stuff, doesn't it, guys? But at the end of the day, you really need to have a good idea of their actual talent, their actual ability, the role that they play on their team. You're not just drafting a player because of their name or because you like the college that they went to. You're drafting each pick that you make. You're drafting with the intent that this player is going to help me win a championship. You're not taking any people just because they play for your home team. Every player is going to count on your fantasy football roster, and you need to make every pick with the sole intent that this man is going to help me win that championship. Now, of course, like I said, this isn't your final roster. Maybe this man will help me win my championship by being a trade piece to another team to acquire a piece that I'm going to need later, depending on injury, depending on schedule, depending on how the world is working, how the wind is blowing. But at the end of the day, in your fantasy football draft, you also do not ever be influenced by other people's picks. Now, I'm going to be honest with y'all, ladies and gentlemen. I myself, Indo is my Nindo. Yes, me, Dallas Clark. The curls himself. I have fallen victim to this myself. I have found myself after fantasy drafts being like, why didn't I take that player? I let this guy take this guy and confused me as to why he wasn't taking that guy. And it made me... I was influenced by other picks, and you do not ever want to be influenced by other picks. At the end of the day, every pick should be your own. Don't base it upon what everybody else is doing. If you're sitting in the 3rd round and you got 2 running backs on your team, and all of a sudden Patrick Mahomes comes off the board, and all of a sudden Josh Allen come off the board, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, they're going quarterback. they going quarterbacks. I wasn't planning on going quarterback this early, but they starting to go quarterback. Hey, chill out. Now's not the time. If you weren't feeling like going to quarterback, don't let those other busters taking quarterbacks in your leagues in the 3rd round make you jump and make a mistake. Instead, when you could have went with that elite wide receiver, or you could have went with that elite tight end, you could have went with a more valuable pick at the time. Instead, you got influenced by the other people's picks. Don't be a slave to the rankings, and don't be influenced by other people's picks. Your draft strategy, all this information that I'm giving to you, your fantasy football Bible that you've been making, you're going to use that as more of a guide, as more of a guidance tool. It's not going to be a stone tablet. Everything you're not going to be doing all these hundreds of mock drafts before the season starts to say, if I pick this player, then I'm going to complement it with this player. Nah, let the wind take you where the wind decides to take you. Follow your draft guidelines. Keep these rules in mind, as well as the 6 rules in order to dominate your fantasy draft that I dropped to you a couple of days. And this draft is going to be cake for you this weekend. I guarantee it. And then stick with me through the rest of the season here on the Fantasy Football Huddle. And we gonna be making it rain at the end of the season together. We all gonna be in the money together. But at the end of the day, it's very important to go into your fantasy football draft and have fun. Okay? It's not. Hey, don't take it too seriously. Yeah, you may have money on the line or whatever, but don't take it too seriously. Have fun while you're at it. Just like we have fun every time we come out here on the Fantasy Football Huddle. But I can't thank you guys enough for stopping here today. I just wanted to do a quick video. I think it went a little longer than I even wanted it to. But I just wanted to do a quick video for you today. Like I said, this is how to properly prepare to dominate your fantasy football draft, so that way you can end up with some money at the end of the year. It's your boy Indo is my Nindo. Make sure you guys stay tuned for the next coming videos. I've got a running back special, a wide receiver special, quarterback special. I've got specials on the first 3 rounds of the fantasy football draft. I've got my top 100 coming out. I have got a smorgasbord full of information coming out for you by the end of this NFL fantasy draft weekend. And once next week starts, we starting to talk about the regular season. Week 1, Cowboys Buccaneers on that Thursday night football schedule. I can't wait. I know a lot of Cowboys fans, they can't wait. I know a lot of football fans that can't wait. Getting back into the real thing, I can't wait to do it. I know y'all can't wait, and I can't wait to experience it with you guys. Thank you so much for stopping here at the Fantasy Football Huddle, presented by the Huddle Chat Sports Show. It's your boy Indo is my Nindo, and as always, I hope your plants never stop growing and the news never stops showing, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks so much for checking me out, and I'm the out of here, baby. Be easy out there.